doesn't start on time, so here we are. Thanks for coming. Clap once if you can hear me. No. Okay. Hello. Hi. Good afternoon. Hope you're having a good day. It's great to be here at Mercury. I'm a small investor in the company, which is why I'm here. I'm kidding. How many people here are founders? Just about everyone. And who's going to raise money sometime soon? Or have? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things. Storytelling is my passion. There's going to be a lot of content. And I literally put these slides together about 10 minutes ago. I'm going to run through it as fast as I can. And the goal is to save as much time as questions, because usually there's a whole lot of questions about this. So my name is Siqi. I run a company called Runway.com. We're a finance platform. Yeah, Runway. Yeah, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Totally not planted at all. And we're not the AI one. That's RunwayML.com. We're the .com. We make finance software for companies like AngelList, Superhuman, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's me. And one of the things that I've been really interested in and served my career very well is telling good stories. Because when people think about stories, they think about stories in the context of, I need to tell a story for marketing or for investors. And those are very useful stories to tell. But I think stories are actually much more important than something you do on the side. I think the right way to think about a story is almost as a central operating pillar of a company. And the right way I think about a story is a story comes from a founder or a CEO. It goes to the wider team, and then it goes to your customers, and then it goes to your would-be customers, and it's a series of concentric circles. And if you can have the same story across your leadership team, across your customers, across your wider team, now you're telling the same story. When you're treating a story as something you do on the side, that's when you get a lack of cohesion. Marketing is telling a story, but a product doesn't really do this. And the culture of your company isn't reflected in that same story. So having one story, a story that you can only tell, is super important. So let's talk about how we get there. So the thing about stories is that they're not just a marketing thing. And I think they're super impactful and important because they are a deep part of what makes us human. So you think about what defines humanity, right? Before we invented language, we had nothing, right? So we were hunter-gatherers. But with the invention of language, we're able to now coordinate people within earshot. That's what enabled us to form tribes. And when we invented the written word, language that's written down, now we can coordinate groups of humans across time and space. And that's what created nations and civilizations. So the ability through language to tell stories and communicate intent is a very deep part of what makes us human. And it's no wonder that it's therefore that impactful. So I'm going to talk about the 3 layers of storytelling. And so for some context, the first half I'm going to tell you about stories is taught to me by our only advisor at Runway. He has the best name ever. His name is Wolfgang Hammer. Yeah, literally the best name I've ever heard. So he was the executive producer of House of Cards and Hunger Games. He ran Lionsgate and Miramax. And he took an interest in our company and helped us tell our story. And this is the framework it's taught to me. So there's 3 layers to story. And the first 2 layers people are generally familiar with. The first layer is content. It is the unfolding action and facts you can see on screen, right? It's what's happening, it's events. The second layer is also generally something we're familiar with, which is what we're feeling through the emotions and the unfolding action on screen, right? What are the characters feeling? What are we feeling? And therefore, that makes us feel certain deep emotions and attachments to characters and the story. But the best stories have a deeper layer, and this deeper layer is what Wolfgang calls a conflict between worldviews. And this is what gives certain stories this je ne sais quoi, this deeper meaning beyond just oh, I felt something interesting happened. And in the context of a startup, usually the conflict is between 2 worldviews. What's called a global dominant worldview, and this is the world as it is, what everyone generally believes, people accept it as fact and how things work. And then there is an underdog worldview. And this is the worldview which looks at the dominant worldview and finds the subtle lies that aren't obvious to people and believes that there is a better worldview that can exist. and the unfolding of a story plays out the conflict between these two worldviews. And so defining a good story for a startup is about understanding what the dominant worldview is and what the underdog worldview is. And the most difficult part, super deceptively difficult, is that getting the dominant worldview right. And so the reason why this is so hard is when we're doing a startup, the default is like, well, the world is broken, and look at the way people are raising money. It's terrible, and we have AngelList, and now it is way better. The problem with that dominant worldview is that it's so easy to caricature a worldview. But what makes stories, when you think about the best stories that we know believable, are not like a believable hero. What makes heroes and these underdog worldviews believable are credible villains. When you think about like the best stories, it is when a villain has credible motivations. I mean, you can even think about Avengers, Infinity War, right? Thanos had a credible motivation. That's what made him sympathetic and believable. The twirling mustache villain does not make it believable. And so when I work with different companies I invested in helping them craft their narrative, and this 100% has never failed. It is the most remarkable thing. I asked them, can you describe what your number one competitor does and why they're going to win? And with as much credibility as you can, with much honesty as you can. And these are all smart people, and I think I'm communicating and speaking English correctly. They understand what I'm asking. 100% of the time, maybe one or two sentences in, they said, and this is why they're terrible, and it's never going to work. 100% of the time. Because we're so used to thinking about why we're going to work and why all our competitors are bad, that we can't give the credit of something believable, believable motivations, intelligence, to the dominant worldview as it is. And without that understanding, you're not going to be able to craft a credible villain, and you're not going to be able to have a believable story. Getting the dominant worldview right is the hardest part. So I spent 3 months workshopping this with Wolfgang, with like professional help, and it was still fairly difficult to do for Runway. But if you want to know more about that, we can talk about it later, but I want to leave you with that. Stories need to have credible villains to be believable. Okay, now let's talk about stories in the context of fundraising. I have 2 high-level frameworks for stories in the context of fundraising that informs everything I'm about to tell you. The first framework is emotion. So I think about maybe like now 15 years ago, I had a meeting where I pitched Vinod Khosla, and I was so excited to meet him. And I asked him, hey, Vinod, how do you make investment decisions, right? And he just looked at me and he said, emotion. And I said, I didn't say this, but I was thinking, that is, like, what am I supposed to do with that? That's the dumbest, but the more I operated and with experience, the more I realized he was actually telling me exactly how he made decisions, and it's correct. So the way we normally think, the rational way we think a VC might make a decision when they're making an investment decision is you multiply the probability of success, right? There's some chance a company is going to work, and then if it does work, it's going to be worth like $1 billion, $10 million. You multiply to 2, you get expected value, and then maybe there's a hurdle rate for like, okay, for your money for investment to be worth it, it has to return a certain amount. And if A is higher than B, then you invest. That's actually not how it works, because that's actually not how any human makes decisions. And believe it or not, VCs are also humans. And so the way people make decisions, investors included, is emotion. It's the reason why we do anything. Like, we kind of feel things and we justify it later. And if we kind of forget that, if we assume that's not true, investors are some kind of like different robotic beast, we end up not telling very good stories. So that's the first framework. Emotion is why people do anything, investors included. The second framework is the power law. And so this is more widely understood, but in case this is new to you, the nature of venture capital is around the power law. So what it means is roughly you invest about 100 companies, maybe 1 to 3 of them are going to return your entire fund many times over. What happens to the other 95 basically doesn't matter. And so your entire goal as an investor is to make sure, especially in the early stage, is to make sure that if you are one of the companies that could credibly return your fund many times over, they can't afford to ignore you. And there's also, so there's structural incentives for why this is important and how to think about an investment. But there's also the career incentives of an investor. If you think about a career investor working in VC, if you invested in Uber like one time, or like Jason Calacanis, you're now the Uber guy. Like you're forever the Uber guy. So being able to invest in companies that can return your fund many times over is super important. And so these are the two high-level frameworks I think about when I'm trying to craft a good story in the context of fundraising. And so what does that mean for what your story should do if those are the two requirements? One is emotion as a framework, and the other is you want to make sure that you are communicating you are going to build a company that, if works, could return the fund many times over, right? So I skipped a step, but one of the things about the framework, the rational framework, right, the likelihood of success of a company and the size of outcome if successful, basically what I'm saying is that the second term matters a whole lot more than the first one, because most things they invest in are not expected to work. Your company has to work, because you only got one, but they have a lot. So anyway, if you combine these two frameworks, what do you get? You get this goal for your story, and the goal for your story is you want them to feel something important that gets them to a yes decision on you. And the best way to deliver emotions, stories are a time-tested vehicle for the delivery of emotions. That's what stories do. And the goal of the story is how this company becomes one of the largest companies on the planet. That is like the framework I think about the story. So I realized I forgot to add a slide. But so before I structure the story, I will literally carve out and map the emotional journey I want to take people on in the story. So and there's different emotional journeys you can map. The one I like to use starts with amusement, then it leads to surprise, which then leads to, amusement, which leads to curiosity, which leads to surprise, then it leads to awe, then it leads to greed. And so if I break that down, amusement, I want them to know at the start of a pitch that even if they learn nothing from here and they decide not to invest, at least they will not be bored. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I want to spark some curiosity. One of the great things of being an investor is you get to learn new things at the frontier of what's happening in the world all the time. These are secrets about the world that they're so interesting that people are willing to devote 5, 10 years of their lives to, and it's always going to be interesting. So I want to make sure they spark that curiosity, that they're not going to be bored and they're going to learn something interesting. That curiosity needs to pay off somehow. And that curiosity leads to some kind of surprise. Oh my God, I didn't know that about how silicon photonics works in inference and waveguides maybe in the future. Which then leads to awe. If that is true, and this thing is as interesting as I think it is, oh my God, this could be one of the largest companies in the world, which then leads to greed, the final emotion, which then leads to the only question that you want to hear, which is, how can I invest? All other questions are bad. I'll come back to that in a second. So that's an emotional journey. So how do you actually craft a story that delivers that emotional journey? So I have this 3-act framework I like. First one is the origin. I want to preface this. I talk about 3 acts. I'm not talking about the 10 slides, the competitor slide and the market sizing slide. And those are probably ones that you're familiar with because when you Google investor pitch deck template, that's probably what comes up. I believe that is probably the worst possible format to use. If you trace a genetic tree of that template, it always goes back to one of Sequoia or Founders Fund. There's zero doubt in my mind that is the format they would like. The problem is their incentives and your incentives are completely unaligned. Their incentives are to invest in the very best companies and pass on the ones that want to invest in as fast as possible. You want people to invest in your company no matter what. It's not even close. So you can have all of the content, all of the beats of that template, but if you put it into a story form so people feel something, you're going to be a lot more successful. So Act 1 is the origin. Oh my God. So just click OK. All right. How are we doing time? OK, good. So we still have time. Act 1 is the origin story. And this roughly corresponds to the problem, opportunity, market slide. And people when I talk to founders, like, I don't know how to tell a story, like here's my pitch deck, and I use a template. And the story for this part is very simple. How did you tell me the story of why you decided to work on what you're doing? And it's always interesting. It's like, oh, I was doing research in a lab, and like something weird happened, and I was surprised, and turned out to be like an interesting business opportunity. That is really interesting because you get to learn about what the secret is, who this person is, how they got there. And roughly, what you're trying to do is you're describing the market opportunity, you're describing who you are, but all in story form. And the mental image I have of a successful Act 1 is, it's like you're telling a story of how you were walking down the street one day, and you tripped over a rock made out of solid gold that's invisible, and it's only visible to you. And if you have done this successfully, notice at no point are you talking about the product or the company. What you're trying to do is you're describing this hole in the universe with such vivid detail that I can therefore already imagine in my head the shape of a thing that might fill that hole. And that's what Act 2 is about. Act 2 is the now, which doesn't work. Oh no, my clicker is broken. Crap. Can you just click on? Sorry, maybe I just need to focus it. Yeah, there we go. There we go. All right, right now, the now. The now is where the company is, and this is where you do get to talk about your product. You want to talk about your traction. But the trick is you want to make sure the product is actually not a surprise. The worst sales pitches is when you present your product and people have no idea what it's for and what problem it's solving. Act 1 should have done such a good job of describing the problem that I can already imagine a solution such that when you're showing me the product, I'm like, yeah, of course that's how it should work. There is no surprise at all. And you also get to talk about your traction, your metrics here. This is like how the progress of the business so far. The one thing I'll say about traction is that the number one mistake I've seen around that is that people try to overstate it and talk about how amazing the traction is. And there is no possible positive payoff in angling your traction that way. And the reason is, if you think about what the goal is, you're trying to communicate that your goal is to build one of the largest companies in the world. There's no amount of traction today that is going to be interesting to you. And if your traction isn't good and you say it's good, well, now we're on the same page. Now I'm going to like poke holes in why your traction isn't actually that good. And if it is good, it's even more interesting to say, well, we're just getting started. So that's the one pro tip I'll have there. Act 3 is a future. And this is simultaneously the most important, hardest, and easiest part of the entire pitch. And interestingly enough, this is also a section where basically it doesn't exist in most pitch decks. And this is the story of how you starting from where you are today, become, step by step, inevitably one of the largest companies on the planet. And the thing that makes this hard is like you obviously have to be very convincing because you're telling a very big story, but hopefully the reason why you founded this company is because you think you have a chance of getting there. It's very important because the entire reason why an investor is investing is not what's already happened, it's what's going to happen in the future, right? If they're investing on what's already happened, they should be investing in public markets. This is the reason why they're actually investing, and this is what you're actually selling. You have to know what you're selling, and this is really difficult for founders to remember because we are so heads down all the time on what the product is, what the traction is, what happened yesterday. All of that's important, but what you're selling to investors is the future, and too many decks barely talk about this at all. Of course, like as your later stages, this changes, right? If you're in the public markets, if you're a series like CD company, the shift between actual data and story changes. But at the earliest stages, this is the entire thing. And so super important, it's super hard, but it's also the easiest part because unlike everything that's happened before, this is in the future, it hasn't happened yet. You can say whatever you want, they're just words. You want the words to be correct and believable, and you want to live up to those words, but still, you just have to find the right words. Okay, so this is why it's the hard bit, right? A few more things, and then we'll go to questions. So one is the role of questions. And so there is a popular belief when you get questions after a pitch that is a sign of interest, right? I just delivered my presentation to investors and I'm getting a bunch of questions. I think that is not the best way to think about the role of questions. I think the right way to think about questions is basically they're pointers to compiler errors in your pitch. Like they're literally bugs. And the reason why I think about that, I think about it this way, and it's like not always literally true, but I will say when I pitch an investor, and when they invest, usually it happens because I just gave them the pitch and their question was only, how can I invest, right? Like if it was any other question, I think the likelihood immediately goes down by 80%. But anyway, how to think about the role of questions. Why are they bugs? So when you if you imagine for a second the last time you were sold something, someone was selling you something and you didn't want to buy it, right? There was an objection in your head, right? And by the time you had an objection, you were no longer paying attention, right? Okay, so imagine there's an objection that an investor has and you're done pitching. What's the first question they're likely to ask? It's almost certainly the objection that we're holding 3 slides in. And so, a real example of this. So that is what a question is, and the algorithm for iteratively working on your pitch to make it better, such that you get the only good outcome, which is how can I invest, is basically figure out how to systematically remove the questions until there is only one question left. And so I'll give you a real example of how I did this. 2012 or so, I was raising for my second company. And we were doing some mobile app. Details are important, but we had this fundraising schedule back to back with a bunch of investors. And I think it was a second meeting of the Monday of us raising. And we did this pitch, and I thought it went well. The first question was, how do you think about competition? It feels like a really competitive space. At that point, I knew they weren't going to invest, right? Because they were thinking about competition the entire time. They're no longer paying attention during like the 80% of my awesome presentation. And so we're like, oh, well, look at our background. We know distribution. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what the answer is. They already decided. And so before the next meeting, 3 slides in, I add a slide and says, this is a very competitive space. It's like one of the most competitive ever. And here's why we're still doing it. That question never came up again. And so the systematic removal of questions is how you ultimately get to, as close as possible, the only good question you want to have. So that's the first mental model or tip I want to leave you with. The second one is mindset. And this actually like maybe the most important thing. I know there's like a lot of content, but this is hard to get right. And it's invisible, right? Because it's easy to find a template for a pitch deck. It's easy to go to talk like this and we get some pro tips. But mindset is something we don't talk about. And so let me talk about what this means to me. The default mindset of a founder when they're raising money is that there is this person across the table from me, and this person is Mr. Moneybags. And if Mr. Moneybags does not decide to give me money, I'm screwed. So I need to sell Mr. Moneybags to give me money. And that is not a particularly winning mindset. I think the winning mindset, and I actually think more factually correct mindset, is that the person across the table from me in this meeting has a much harder job in this meeting than I do. Because I'm considerate their job in this meeting to sell me a liquid US dollar. And their US dollar buys the same exact shit as everyone else's liquid US dollar. But what I'm paying for that is a one-of-a-kind ticket that's to 100x their dollar. And I'm asking myself, why is it their dollar I'm multiplying, not someone else's? And I'm not saying that, but I'm thinking it. And when I'm thinking it, people can feel it. And that is sort of like the animal sort of like instinct that you can start feeling that changes the vibe of a meeting. And a lot of investor meeting is about vibe. Believe it or not. And also, it's not popular on Twitter, and people are going to write a Medium post about it, but it is true. And that's it. So any questions? Yeah.
I've gotten the question several times after an investor meeting. This feels inevitable. Why isn't everyone else doing it? How do you answer that question?
Depends on what you're doing. And I would say like...
So we're early.
Yeah.
So we're early, but it is the way that I tell the story. Again, I've gotten that feedback. This feels inevitable. Why isn't everybody else doing it?
It feels inevitable. That's why isn't everyone else doing it? I think there's a few different ways to answer that question and to address that. I mean, the thing I like to do is my algorithm is if that question comes up, just say it up front, right? This feels inevitable, and maybe everyone else is doing it, or maybe they're not doing it, and there's a reason for it, right? So like, it's one of the frameworks I have is it's called the 8 Mile method. Everyone seen the movie 8 Mile? Yeah, Eminem, right? At the very last rap battle, he just like disses himself in all the possible ways, and it leaves the opponent with nothing to say. Like, people should do that. Yeah, this is a tough one because I think this is why actually hot introductions, warm introductions matter a whole lot. Because yeah, if that's your situation, then you have to basically give the deck. The way I think about it is like if you have to do that, you can have a teaser deck where it doesn't show everything, or a really, really good blurb, right? So when I raised in this for I think it was like, what is it, 2014 or so, when I started a second company, a bunch of investors were like, oh, what are you doing next? And we should meet. And I got that question. And my answer was, we don't have a deck, but we have a really cool demo. And we did have a deck. We rehearsed the crap out of that deck. I knew that deck cold, but I didn't want to have the deck because I wanted the vibe of the meeting to be more of equal terms, and I'm like trying to sell you something. So there's different ways to handle it. Jackie.
Not to be a go-to-market girl,
Yes.
but as a go-to-market girl in the meantime, how would you, not to be the go-to-market girl in the room, but how would you adapt this to a prospect or customer?
Yeah, I mean, like it's I think it's fairly universal in the sense that like the principles work not because it works for fundraising, but because it works for humans, right? And so I was taught this term by our head of sales. It was like sales smell, like you can tell when there's that smell, and like commission breath. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. And no one likes that, right? Like the AEs that perform the best are not the stereotypical ones that are like the used car salesman. They try to understand you. They don't want to, if you buy it, great. If you don't, great. They believe in their product. And it's very much the same vibe as like a good fundraising pitch.
So the framework that you're teaching us is fantastic, and I want to follow it. However, there's a lot of details that aren't included. Would you suggest pairing that with a data room link, like after a meeting?
Okay. Yeah, this is a great question. And a variation of this question I hear a lot is, what should I include in the deck or the email or the room, right? And everyone's looking for the right answer. For me, the framework it just goes back to what the goal is and the right framework. For every slide and every piece of content, what do you want someone to feel, right? And does this piece of data make people feel the right thing? If it does, you include it in your deck. If it doesn't, and you must have it as part of standard diligence, then you put it in the data room. Generally, you don't want to share your data room until like you have a term sheet and it's under due diligence, right? You have to like, okay, we're gonna date before we get married, right? So you don't send the data room up front, but for any piece of data for which you think you're gonna be able to create a useful emotion, then you include it. If not, just kill it.
Great presentation. As an investor myself, that presentation resonates with me a lot.
Yes.
But the problem
Here's
is
the but.
on there's always a but, right? On Act 3, the future.
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of pitch deck I see, the future is very hard to believe.
Yeah.
I saw one deck yesterday that had 3 years, 20% market share. It has like $3 billion, revenue. They are. So as a founder, I guess this is for the founders in the room. How do you make sure that the future vision can stroke my greed, but at the same time
Yeah.
make it believable?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good one, and especially because you're an investor. So that makes sense, because if you talk about your pitch and then you don't have an act 3, but you just say, hey, it's going to be utopian and we're all going to be rich, no, that's not going to be a believable anything. And the thing is, it goes back to, can you tell a good story? If the story is credible step by step, where it seems inevitable, like everything adds up, then that's how you get to that level of belief, and it has to be a story. And that's why the single slide ending is not what you want to do. I think that's all my time. Thank you.